Hello and welcome back to 27 Perspectives, coming to you from the European Parliament in Strasbourg. Today we're going to be talking about the war in Ukraine and the future of the European defense policy. I have two guests with me today that I'm going to discuss with. Next to me is sitting Viola von Cramon-Taubadella, member of the Greens of the European Free Alliance from Germany. And to her left, Andros Kubilius, member of the group of the European People's Party from Lithuania. Thank you both so much for being here today and for taking the time to answer some of our questions. We're going to just start right into it, if that's okay with you. It has now been over a year that the Russian war of aggression has been going on. I'm sure over this year, we've all experienced times where the news has made us feel sad, angry, maybe numb or scared. So to start us off, I'd like to know, how have you personally experienced this period so far? What has surprised you? What has possibly changed your political stance? And what has affected you most?
Well, first of all, I think it was a huge shock. Not that we were surprised. I mean, the US intelligence had warned us for months ahead of the full-fledged invasion to Ukraine. But nevertheless, when the day came and I was literally watching it, I was in Washington at that time and live seeing how the shelling started, I was trembling, I was shocked.
Yes.
I mean, all my friends called me, texted me. So there was a first phase of being completely confused, irritated. But then when we settled, and especially with the colleagues here in the parliament, I think we were very swift and very decisive in our responses. We not just have shown support, but we made sure that we stand on the side of Ukraine, that we are ready to support, to deliver whatever it's necessary on the humanitarian side, weapons side, everything which need to be sorted out. But personally, since I work in Ukraine since '96, I was completely shocked and I was in tears.
Mr. Kubilius, how has it been for you?
Well, absolutely, very similar feelings, really shocked. And I even can confess that I was, not believing that Putin will make such a, stupid, mad, whatever, criminal mistake. So that is the first thing. Second, really positively surprised by EU and the whole Western community response. Knowing a little bit of European bureaucracy, so we were more skeptical about, how those responses will come. So, really they came very, very rapidly in an effective way. Second, really, what was, again, in some way, of course, tragic but positive, if to look to the whole year, positive evaluation, that, Ukrainian motivation to defend their country, in combination with the Western military assistance, have shown that, this combination is much stronger than Russian, military might, which they were, describing in their propaganda before that. And the last point, I am quite optimistic that, first of all, that really Ukraine will win. Second, that, there will be good progress from EU side with integration of Ukraine towards EU. And that can bring a lot of positive changes also in Russia. But that's perhaps, next questions.
No, but that's so good to hear something positive, a nice outlook for us. Thank you. So, of course, we stand with Ukraine, the EU does, but Ukraine has also been an official candidate for EU membership since this last year. What could a Ukrainian future in the EU look like, and what challenges are there still to overcome for the Ukraine to become an official member?
If I should start here as well, I mean, the first priority for all of us is to stop the war. We need to make sure not just to stop the war, but to make sure that Russia will be defeated.
Yes.
And the majority of this House is very much in line of that. Without a victory of Ukraine, however you want to call the victory, it will be relatively difficult to work together with Russia, with Putin's regime and so on. So it is clear we need to make sure that the bravery of Ukraine is paid off with our support. At a certain time, of course, we will go into a phase of negotiation. I think for the Ukrainian people, it was extremely important to see this candidate status, to see the EU perspective. I mean, they are fighting with the EU flags in their hand. They were standing on the Maidan in 2013, 2014. They were dying for the idea of the European values, of the concept of the European Union. I mean, that was the first country actually asking for membership already long ago, like in the beginning of the 2000s, and then repeatedly. And then again with Maidan, they really confirmed that the population and their citizens are ready for this phase. With the war, I think it was important for them to give them the candidate status. And now, with then hopefully starting with the reconstruction phase, we need to make sure that we start the accession talks as well. We need a political framework where we see where the money goes, but also how we're going to rebuild democracy and institutions in this country. And this will only work if we start implementing parts of the European acquis at the same time. So this needs to be, or needs to go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You know, of course, the first priority is very clear, and you know, it overshadows everything else. For time being, it's of course victory of Ukraine, military victory. Second, after the victory, and even during the war, you know, we need to look into different stages of reconstruction. You know, and after the war, of course, there will be, you know, big phase of reconstruction, and it should go in parallel with succession, because those, you know, investors who will come to Ukraine both to rebuild and to modernize the Ukrainian economy, they need to know according to what rules, you know, everything is going to happen. That is very, very clear. And of course, negotiations are bringing very important instruments. It's permanent, you know, and regular evaluation of the country. So it helps country to know where they are. Mm. And of course, it helps also EU to see the progress of the country. For EU, success of Ukraine is very important also. Because that can bring a lot of what I call, you know, soft geopolitical influence on the next neighborhood, including Russia. You know, I think that Putin started the war exactly being afraid of Ukrainian success, because, you know, if Russian people will start to demand the same, that will be, you know, end of his regime in Kremlin, and that is why, you know, success should be our goal also of Ukraine. And success, as we know from our recent history, from, you know, starting from the beginning of 90s, can be achieved in this region only through integration towards EU. So there is, you know, an interest for Ukraine to become member of EU, but also it's our interest, you know, to help Ukraine to become member of EU and to have possibility to push, you know, spread of democracy into the whole eastern part of European continent, which is precondition of sustainable peace on the European continent.
Okay. Right, so our priorities are clear, and the war first, of course. But something that is going on right now is that the EU is also facing the challenge of taking in refugees from Ukraine. What prospects can the EU offer to Ukrainians coming here as war refugees?
I should start. No, it's definitely, again, this is a challenge, but as we have seen during the last year, Europeans have shown, you know, very strong solidarity, which perhaps again even surprised us. Accepting all the refugees, you know, allowing them to live in their, you know, houses, in their apartment buildings, giving all the, you know, support for them to establish, to find the job, schools for kids, and so on and so on. So that's really, I do not see anything, some kind of new challenge from that side coming. But what we need to do, we need to look how we can assist those refugees, you know, in their wish to come back to Ukraine. Of course, there are refugees which ran away from, you know, from the front line, from those regions which were bombed and so on. But there are refugees which went out from those regions which at the first was, you know, were occupied, but then, you know, deoccupied, and where people could start to live again. I was recently from here. We went to Chernigov, which is 100 kilometers up to the western north, and where really Russians came, you know, at the very beginning, targeting Kiev. So people are coming back, but really damages to, you know, to their private houses, to apartment houses are very huge, and they cannot wait till all that, big, what we call Marshall Plan, for reconstruction of Ukraine will start to be implemented. And that is where we need to see how we can help, especially with the private, housing, to be rebuilt, where really EU is doing a lot, but I think that we can do even more. There are a lot of very nice private initiatives from different NGOs from Europe. There are EU funds which are coming, but I think that even our national governments can look how to be more effective, even resolving some very I would call very practical issues. For example, in Chernigov, the biggest problem was lack of materials to rebuild, for construction. Because industries are quite heavily destroyed, and how to organize deliveries of construction material. That is an issue for us, to find a solution.
That actually leads us very nicely into our next question. Thank you for that. About non-military assistance. What has the EU already done in terms of financial and humanitarian aid, and what do you think it still should be doing?
Well, first of all, we give a lot of money each and every month so that the country can get running. And that people in the public service, soldiers and so on, are paid the wages, their salaries, and that is an extremely big task. So Ukraine needs apparently 5 billion euros per month. There's a shared responsibility with other partners, but that is first and foremost also the responsibility of the European Union, while we are neighbors and we feel that it is also up to us to make this happen. Second of all, the humanitarian aid Andrius has mentioned is crucial for Ukraine, be it for the IDPs, be it for the refugees, be it for different, educational assistance, be it for post-traumatic support assistance, mental health, and so on. So many of these measures are financed actually by the European program through different programs, through NGOs, and so on. And when it comes to the reconstruction phase, and now we see already that the civil infrastructure is massively destroyed, that is one of the key, elements of this war. So Putin's aim is to destroy the civil life in Ukraine, Ukrainians' identity. And that started with social infrastructure, hospitals, schools, libraries and everything, but also on the energy infrastructure. They were heavily shelled. We try to do this interim maintenance and so on, but when it comes to, let's say, the reconstruction phase, this will be the main task, and there we need to. And the last point I want to make, of course, not everything can go through Kiev. So we need also the decentralized structure, which worked very well before the war. We had well-functioning administrations on the local level, on the municipal level, and that was one of the big reforms, achievements coming from the EU, coming from different member states towards Ukraine, and also here. A lot of activities had happened during the war, but even more so will happen, hopefully, then when the war is finished. So there's a huge package of humanitarian, financial reconstruction of infrastructure, and also on the mental, on the health side, which had already been sent, but will be even more so after the war.
Okay, thank you. I want to quickly go back to the one part of aid that we specifically left out before, the military assistance. So recently the decision has been made to send battle tanks to Ukraine. What do you think about the argument that this risks further escalating the conflict?
First of all, the risk is to have very prolonged war. What we can call the war in trenches and so on, and that could be really very, very, very problematic, both for Ukraine, especially for Ukraine, and of course for the West. So that's why we need to see how really we could achieve the end of the war with Ukrainian victory as quickly as possible. It's such calendar is depending only on the Western capability to deliver enough of weapons. Now, what does it mean, escalation? Of course, Putin is threatening to use nuclear arms and so on from time to time. But I understand that especially Americans managed to explain to Kremlin leadership what will be the answer. And I see that, in some way, those threats to use nuclear arms are diminished. Now, recently, we have seen, this provocation, when Russian fighter jets, destroyed American drone. We shall need to see what does it mean. Well, at least in my view, it shows that, Kremlin is in some kind of desperation. They are starting to understand that they will not be able to achieve anything significant on the ground. They are trying to threaten maybe the West, but that, should not become, the most important paradigm on the Western side. West needs to go forward now. And even, West needs to keep in mind not only how to achieve Ukrainian victory, but also how to assist with such a victory, positive transformations in Russia. The West needs not to be afraid of defeat of Russia, because that is also in some capitals, as I understand, still, there is hesitation to support Ukraine in the biggest way, in the largest way, because of fears about the future of Russia. Russia will have a possibility really to have a transformation towards a normal country, towards a normal development, and so on and so on. And that will depend on Western ability to give weapons now, not at some time, whenever. And I see good progress. If you look into the numbers, since the beginning of this year, deliveries of weapons to Ukraine are increasing very rapidly. And industry started to, at least what we saw during recent period of time, EU Commission started to pay much more attention how to assist European military industries to produce weapons, which are in the need. So things are moving into the right direction.
Maybe
Sure.
one sentence on escalation. What we have seen, it doesn't need anything for Putin to escalate. He does it anyway. He escalates whenever he wants. He doesn't need any external actor. He doesn't need any weapon deliveries. So from the day one on, we have seen no matter what we do, he escalates. No matter what Ukraine, and they tried to negotiate in the first days of the war, they tried to reach out to the Russian counterpart. They tried to reach out to the Russian public, to the Russian civil society, and so on. But no matter what they have communicated, the answer was massive shelling, was destroying, was killing, was torturing and deporting people. So in the end, we have to consider that, as Andreas has said, we have to make sure Ukraine has to limit and to diminish the victims. And this is only possible, unfortunately, it's hard to say, with a superior military supply. And that's why it is crucial at that moment that we do not stop supplying them when Ukraine is at a crossing point. And obviously, Russia runs out of ammunition, runs out of people, has only old military equipment. And the success at the moment, unfortunately, we will see even this under very high human cost, could be that the next offensive in spring will be possible. And so if we want Ukraine to liberate the territory, if we want to save human life in Ukraine, the first step to do is give them the protection they need. And the protection they need at that moment is unfortunately military equipment.
Thank you. Let us stick with the important question that you both mentioned in your answers, how to deal with Russia. So, of course, the European sanctions against Russia are ongoing. If you could draw a little interim conclusion for us, maybe you start us off, how effective have these sanctions been and what loopholes still need to be closed?
Well, I mean, we, with the 10th sanctions package, we are at a good point, at a good level. But nevertheless, there are too many circumventions, loopholes when it comes to banking system, when it comes to logistics, when it comes to certain goods. So we see that there is the level of trade with certain states such as Turkey, Georgia, Armenia, Kazakhstan is mainly to circumvent Western sanctions. Can we avoid that? I would say only partly if we call out those countries who support Russia in that, and second of all, also our companies who use this new routes or path to deliver their goods to Russia. But I think on the German side, for example, our Minister for Economy, Robert Habeck, has 2 weeks ago explicitly said that they would go after those companies, that they would see this not as a small violation, but as a rather major threat to the sanction regime. And I think this is important to note. That it is in the there is a public awareness, there's a political will to close the loopholes, to close these violations, and in the next sanctions package that we, for example, will include Rosatom, will include diamonds, will include other sources of income, which still enables Putin to finance the war. When it comes to high technology, I think we are already very good. You see that Putin reaches out to certain states to receive this technological equipment he needs for the military production, which he could not receive on the legal way. So there you see there is a limitation that makes a difference whether the sanctions are in place or not. But on other levels, when it comes to financial services, logistics, and certain goods such as diamonds, we are still there's still some potential we need to raise.
Well, I can just nothing almost to add. I mean, we need to see in a very clear way that sanctions are doing their job. First of all, sanctions on oil and gas, and especially this introduction of caps. That is diminishing very heavily Russian budget incomes. At least what we can understand from different experts, it can happen that Russia will use all its reserves during this year, financial reserves, because they cannot finance from the budgetary incomes. Second, absolutely clear also the last year statistics is very it brings very clear evidence. EU exports to Russia of different goods, not speaking about oil and gas, but different goods from EU to Russia went down by, if I am correct, 56%. But EU export to neighboring countries like Kazakhstan, Georgia, Turkey, of the same goods increased by the same percentage. It's almost equal. So it's very clear that this is how Russia is trying to circumvent sanctions using some neighboring countries, some clear mechanism, and we need to stop that. It's good that on EU side there is, as I understand, it's quite clear understanding of those problems. It's good that EU appointed special envoy on sanctions, and I think that quite soon we shall come with solutions how to resolve those issues. I don't know, secondary sanctions or whatever. Here should be clear mechanisms, and of course there are still some fields where we need simply to put, sanctions on Rosatom and diamonds and really to move forward. Sanctions should stay. Sanctions should be, even more targeted, and they are bringing quite a clear, outcome. And all those who are speaking that, sanctions are not, effective. Come on,
They will work.
Don't try to convince us to remove sanctions,
I wasn't trying to.
No, I'm not saying about you. I'm saying about those who are, speaking that, language. Sanctions are not working. They are working.
Okay. Well, this war has definitely shifted the geopolitical situation in Europe and beyond. Some even call it a new Cold War. What would you say to those people? Is that statement accurate?
Well, it's not like two camps. It's more difficult. And during the Cold War, I do remember the time. You remember this even better. We had a clear two camp side. One was on the Soviet Union, and the other one was with the West, not just with the US. And here, I think it's a bit more difficult because we have some undecided countries, such as India, China. I mean, China publicly, yes, they are still backing Russia in the Security Council, but on the other hand, they explicitly do not deliver any weapons. They don't deliver most of the goods Russia is asking for. So they are supporting, but only half-hearted. They know exactly they don't want Russia to lose, but they also don't want Russia to win and to lose Ukraine. So that's why they're in the middle, similar to the situation in India, Brazil, and other bigger states. So it is not, as it has been before, just a two-camp situation. There are interest-driven countries, and we need to make sure that they understand what is on stake in Europe. We had a multipolar security order in the European Union, and we invested a lot in that, at least here in the European Union and the European Parliament. This is now destroyed with this terrible full invasion of Russia to Ukraine. But if Russia is victorious, if Russia is successful there, this will be not the only country they will try to invade, to topple, where we see already first tendencies in Moldova, in Georgia in a different way, but also in other countries on the Western Balkan, and that could really threaten us. So we need to make sure that it's not a Western concept behind that, but it's our idea of peace and stability and the opportunity for other countries to participate in this, let's say, global order. This is important to show and to demonstrate. It's not about pulling one country on our side. It is rather to say, hey, if we can agree on certain things, we all will have a win-win situation. We'll all will benefit from this stability and peace concept, rather than having the strongest winning a war and then toppling down one government after the other.
Well, again, my vision is very clear. I don't know, those comparisons with the Cold War does not bring for me anything, added value. I see very simply what we are facing, and what is different from Cold War period. We are facing post-imperial Russia, which is, going through very difficult period in their, of people mentality. Still, some people are having quite a lot of, nostalgia to glorious imperial past, and Putin is playing those games on those emotions, unfortunately, because he considers that it can help him to keep his, autocratic and kleptocratic power. That's very important. We should not forget about kleptocracy, and that is what brings Russia into some way becoming weaker and weaker. And the war was started because of Putin's understanding that Russia is becoming weaker, and Ukrainian success can bring a lot of Russians to try to follow the same example. So the question is not only how we should, during Cold War, NATO philosophy and Western philosophy was very simple: deterrence and defense. We are still keeping the same, philosophy when we see Putin in power, because what we can do, we can, deter Putin, aggression, and to defend ourselves. But I'm always saying, look, post-imperial, Russia has also possibility to transform itself. Russian people have such a possibility. So we need to have this in mind. Transformation of Russia should be also in some way on our radars, And that would bring, you can imagine, well, I'm saying, it's, it demands quite a big, mental power of imagining. For example, how situation will look like if Russia will become a democracy? Stable, sustainable democracy. How how the whole picture of European security architecture will look like. It will be totally different. We shall not have such a permanent threat of authoritarian Russia, kleptocratic Russia on our border. That is why in Lithuania, now I'm always saying, we have the biggest interest to have good relations with Russia. But unfortunately, those relations, unfortunately, I don't know how to say, those relations can be good only if Russia is becoming a democracy. That is what we need to keep in our mind.
Ms. von Cramon-Taubadella, do you also have a vision of a future relationship with Russia?
Absolutely. No, I mean, there are great people in Russia. 30 years ago, I went to Russia for half a year. I lived there. I worked with the people. I experienced this a bit of the imperialistic, let's say, attitude. But nevertheless, I mean, the new generation is partly different. And many of them have experienced the life, how it can be in a more tolerant, in a more open society. Unfortunately, those voices have either left the country or being silenced because they are terribly afraid of this repressive regime. So at the moment, it is extremely difficult to create, let's say, this environment where you can imagine there will be another society, another regime, a democratic government, fair and free elections. But I think it should be our ultimate goal, and we should work on that. And we should support those forces, those progressive forces, which are our alliance, which are our partners, and make sure we create a political framework when things like that happen, when Putin is about to leave office, that we are prepared for that we can reach out, that we have economical offers, that we have certain institutions who can then work with new people in power there. So yes, I do think it's possible. It will be a long way, but it is also important that we stay stiff and that we know what we want and that we express what we expect to be our partner in a certain way as Ukraine and other countries are our partners. And this is maybe at the moment, it looks like a dream, but it's not impossible.
Okay. Sadly for now, I do have to bring us back to the current moment where the war is still going on. And I have to talk about Russia being a nuclear power. How likely do you think it is that Russia will make use of its nuclear arsenal, if only to demonstrate its power? And is Europe prepared for that?
Well, as I said at the very beginning, my predictions, or let's say non-belief in Putin aggression against Ukraine, were not very realistic. So I am not feeling myself very strong in prediction, of how Kremlin can behave. But as I said before, as we understand, Americans send very clear message to Russian authorities what it will mean for Russia itself if they will use nuclear arms somewhere, in Ukraine or somewhere else, and in some way, at least we were able to see that Russian leadership changed their rhetoric. They understood what can be consequences for Russia itself and for them, for themselves. So I doubt if really they will attempt to use those nuclear arms. And here, really, if you're asking what should be a European answer, I would say it, again and again, such a situation repeats how important it is for Europe, for EU, to keep, a very strong strategic relationship with the United States of America. Because we cannot compare our nuclear, arms inside of EU, whatever, French ones, with Russian, capacities. The only way to keep the balance, of course, is American nuclear power.
What do you think about this possible dependence on the US? Should Europe maybe rearm itself?
Well, in terms of nuclear, as we say in German, Teilhabe, I think the discussion is just going on, is just starting off. How and where we do end up, whether we just go with an umbrella from the US together with the French and partly from the British, or whether develop something own. I can't really imagine what is the best solution on that. But your original question, will Putin use his nuclear arsenal? I don't think so. I think it's absolutely unrealistic for different reasons. First of all, also in that case, it's not just him deciding. It's a very sophisticated chain of commands, and we have not seen any changes here. So to bully us with nuclear weapons, he knows exactly what this will create: furor, threat, fear, and so on. And that's what he wants to create. He wants to create destabilized societies, uncertainties, and especially fear. Fear is his best weapon. He does not even have to talk about anything else. If he says nuclear, everyone is scared to death, and that works so well. And I would see that he will not win anything military from a nuclear threat, be it this so-called small tacticals or other ones. So, speaking to a military expert, I have got the impression that is absolutely unlikely. And he would like us to react in advance of that. He would like us to stop delivering weapons to Ukraine as a response to his nuclear threat. But is it realistic that he will ever use that in this kind of the war? I don't see this.
Okay. Well, let's scale down the threat level a little bit and talk about the attacks on the Nord Stream pipeline. How do you think the EU should protect its infrastructure?
Well, in the best way, I would say. I don't know how much that infrastructure is protected now, but definitely we need to be ready for all the possible non-military activities of Kremlin, forces, proxies, and so on and so on. So I don't know really. Now there are a lot of different, explanations who exploded Nord Stream, pipelines. But in any case, definitely we need to be ready for, in some way, I would call for terroristic, wave of terroristic attacks from the same, Wagner group or whatever. And that is where we need to, defend our pipelines. We need to be ready for some kind of, other developments in that field, because I am not so much afraid about, nuclear escalation, what we were talking before. But that in Kremlin they can decide, while losing the war in the military, field in Ukraine, to go with some kind of, new specific, I would call adventures somewhere in Europe, that it's more easy to predict, and we need to be ready for that.
Well, on Nord Stream, I think this is the major sabotage act, but it's not the only one. And what we have seen during the last, I would say, 9 or 10 months in Germany especially, electricity, railway, motorway, everything was sabotaged. Even the channel between the Baltic Sea and the North Sea was closed for 2 weeks because some kind of a poison or toxic emulsion was gone into this. So, I mean, we see there's a hybrid threat, a hybrid attack almost every day. Nord Stream was just the most exposed way of showing us how vulnerable we are. And I think we need a thorough investigation. I think what we have heard last week or 2 weeks ago, it sounds very much like a false flag attack. I mean, honestly, why should a pro-Ukrainian group rent a yacht from Rostock and leave explosive material on the table and show everyone that they are from Ukraine? I mean, this would be so stupid. That really looks like a KGB or GRU, the military intelligence from Russia agent action. So I would be very cautious to blame anyone in that moment. But what we need is we need a task force on that. We need special prosecutors on that. We need investigative teams on that. We need a better coordination between member states We need a proper intelligence on that. And this all institution and all this, let's say, competences, we have to make sure that this is on hand while this hybrid war from Russia goes on.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think time-wise, sadly, we have to come to an end slowly. So I know you already said you're not fortune tellers. I know you don't know how the war is going to end. But maybe tell me your favorite scenario of how you think this war is going to end and what that means for Europe's future relationships with Ukraine and Russia.
Well, I don't know, maybe it's my, fault, but I'm always quite optimistic, So I see very clearly, Ukraine has clear future. Winning the war and then integration towards EU and, bright perspective. Russia, as it is now, with Putin, with autocracy, with kleptocracy, with military aggression, it's something from the past. It does not have a future. And I believe that Russia as a state, as a nation, should have also much better future, and it will come. In which way, how, it's not very clear for time being, but it will very much depend, and that is what we need to see. It will very much depend on success of Ukraine. Both military, which will perhaps be a precondition for Putin to go out from Kremlin, and then also opening the doors for normal transformations in Russia, and so on and so on. And that will make big difference on European continent. Those are big tectonic changes which we are facing. Sometimes I am saying in a some kind of metaphorical way that my generation, our generation, we have seen how Berlin walls collapsed.
Yeah.
And now perhaps we are witnessing, when Kremlin walls of autocratic Russia, of kleptocratic Russia, are starting to collapse. Not in material side, not in material view like Berlin walls collapsed, but in some kind of this, mentality, political, developments in Russia and so on and so on. So those are big days, big opportunities, and that is why I am, optimistic.
How about you?
No, I mean, fully agree with Andrius. The Russian project, if we want to call it, is a project of the past. It's anti-feminist, it's anti-climate, it's anti-ecology, it is anti-freedom, anti-tolerance. So everything which actually makes our life here so valuable and for each and everyone to participate, to be inclusive, it is the opposite on what we see in the Putin regime. So if we make Ukraine to win, and this is very likely, and as we see how much our weapons and our assistance as such makes a difference, I think if Ukraine is able to liberate main of its territory during the next weeks and months to come, this will have an impact and also political consequences in Russia. Nobody in Russia wants to be ruled by a loser. So the best thing we can do is make Ukraine win, and then Putin will see it, I would say, its end as soon as possible. Who will take over? We don't know. This will be decided by the people in Russia. There are certain, mayors, there are maybe new parties, maybe there are new actors, whatever, everything is better than what we see now. And then we can create, hopefully, a new project where maybe Russia is included. Yeah? I would like to see, as you said, a full democratic Russia which has an interest in this cooperative approach with us. And so for this and all of this, Ukrainians are the center. We need to make sure they can not just deliver, but they can be independent, sovereign, survive as a state, and then we will see the next steps, which I would see it is in the interest of the EU, but also in the interest of many other states.
Well, thank you both for ending us on such a positive outlook. I think optimism is a great strength. It's nothing to be apologizing for. And with that, I'm afraid we're at an end with today's issue of 27 Perspectives. I hope you enjoyed and that you join us again next time.